She threw the thing at his feet, like one throws a bone to a dog. It was the last thing she did before all her people learned what it meant to truly regret their pride. The relic fell to the floor of the council chamber with a dull thud, and at that moment no one in that vast crystal chamber yet realized that they had just placed in the hands of a man a weapon that would outlive them all. No one laughed louder than Lady Thurin-Val that day. And no one will regret that laughter more than she will, just one Earth year later. The hall of House Kerith-Sol was built to a press. The ceiling soared 40 meters, the walls were carved from a single crystal mined 3 kilometers beneath the surface of their homeworld, and every sound echoed, as if the architecture itself whispered a single message to the guests: you are small, you are insignificant, you are guests in the home of those above you. Jonathan Murphy, humanity's ambassador to the court of House Kerith-Sol, had been standing in the center of this hall for 40 minutes, and all that time 117 eyes of noble families had been looking at him with that mixture of curiosity and contempt with which one looks at a strange beast brought from distant lands for the amusement of the public. He wasn't here by choice. He was here because diplomatic protocol, imposed on humanity after first contact, required a representative of Earth to attend any ceremony that would decide the fate of his species' trade routes. And House Kerith-Sol controlled the only stable hyperspace corridor connecting human colonies with the rest of the established galaxy. In other words, they had humanity by the throat, and they knew it very well. Lady Thurin-Val, the head of the house, sat on a high throne crafted from the same crystal as the walls, her skin, smooth, pale purple, covered with fine, luminous veins, shimmering in the chandeliers whenever she moved. She was beautiful in the kind of way that makes one forget the danger lurking beneath, the way one forgets poison when looking at the vibrant colors of a venomous snake. "So," she said, her voice carrying through the hall with that lazy, condescending lilt one uses to address those they don't consider equal, "humanity is asking for an extension of the trade agreement. Tell me, Ambassador Murphy, is that it?" She paused deliberately, as if the name were too insignificant to retain for more than a second. "What can you offer House Kerith-Sol that we don't already have in a thousand-fold abundance?" Jonathan Murphy stood straight, his hands behind his back, his face a mask of calm he'd cultivated over years of diplomatic service, concealing what was happening inside. But inside, a storm raged, because he knew, if the agreement wasn't extended today, the 3 million people on the Cassini 4 colony would be cut off from medical supplies for the next 2 years until they found an alternative route. "We offer a partnership, Lady Val," he said evenly. "Mutual benefit. Humanity is ready." "Partnership," she interrupted, a faint smile tugging at her lips, the same smile a predator might give when toying with its prey before swallowing it. A charming word for a species that learned to fly between the stars less than a century ago, while our house has ruled the trade routes of this sector for 11,000 years. Laughter rippled through the room, restrained, aristocratic, but no less humiliating. Jonathan felt his face harden, but he didn't allow a muscle to twitch. Lady Val rose from her throne and slowly descended the steps, her long robe woven from a material that shimmered like liquid silver rustling. She approached a small pedestal at the foot of the throne, where, beneath a glass dome, was kept the object the entire court simply called the Founder's Shadow. It was a relic of her house. An artifact thousands of years old, forged from a metal produced nowhere else in the known universe, a dark, almost black blade, without a single notch, set in a hilt adorned with crystals, each one said to contain the memory of one of the founders of House Kerith-Sol. According to their traditions, this relic was sacred. It could not be sold, given away, or transferred to anyone outside the house. It was unthinkable, just as selling the flag of an entire nation was unthinkable. And that's why what Lady Val did next was calculated with surgical, brutal precision. She took the relic from its pedestal, walked over to Jonathan Murphy, and, looking him straight in the eye with a look of cold, calculating contempt, dropped it on the floor at his feet. The blade clanged against the crystal floor of the hall, and the echo of the sound spread throughout the room like a bolt from the blue. "Take it, Ambassador," Lady Val said, triumph ringing in her voice. Let all of House Kerith-Sol witness this moment. I give humanity our most sacred relic, not because you are worthy of it, but because I want everyone in this galaxy to know that even the greatest treasures of my house mean no more to me than a handout to a beggar on the doorstep. Take it home to your small, weak form, and let it remind you who the true masters of the stars are. A murmur, mixed with fresh laughter, rippled through the hall. It was a humiliation, meticulously planned, a public gesture designed to demonstrate to the entire galaxy how insignificant House Kerith-Sol considered humanity. A relic sacred to their culture, tossed to the floor like trash, tossed to a being they didn't even consider worthy of touching it in reverence. Jonathan Murphy slowly dropped to one knee and picked up the blade from the floor. He held it in his hands for a long second, feeling the strange heaviness of the metal, not just physical heaviness, but the heaviness of history, the heaviness of millennia poured into that piece of metal by beings who probably never imagined that their legacy would one day end up in the hands of a human. He looked up at Lady Vol, and what she saw in his gaze made her smile falter slightly, for there was no humiliation in this man's eyes that she had expected. There was something different there. Something like a calm, cold promise. "Thank you, Lady Vol," he said evenly, rising to his feet, holding the blade with the reverence Lady Vol herself had just pointedly denied him. Humanity will accept this gift with the dignity it deserves. He turned and left the hall, taking the relic of House Kerith-Sol with him, and no one in that crystal chamber, not Lady Vol, not her advisors, not the noble families who had watched the spectacle with scornful amusement, suspected that they had just committed one of the greatest diplomatic blunders in the history of their house. *****. The earth greeted Jonathan Murphy the same way it always greeted him, with rain over Geneva, a gray sky, the hum of a city going about its normal life, unaware of what had happened in a distant crystal hall a few weeks ago. He brought the relic to the headquarters of the United Earth Council not as a trophy or as a humiliation, but as what it truly was, a message written by someone else's hand, but which humanity could read in its own way. The council met in closed session. Jonathan placed his blade on the table before the 10 council members and told them everything, every word Lady Vol had said, every chuckle in the hall, every detail of this calculated humiliation. There was silence. The first to speak was the council chairwoman, Amara Disson, a woman whose career began before humanity had even made its first jump through hyperspace, a woman who had seen enough humiliation at the hands of alien houses to know that anger was a luxury not to be shown, but also not to be forgotten. "She wanted to humiliate us in front of the entire galaxy," Amara said quietly, looking at the blade on the table. "She wanted every house, every civilization in this sector of the galaxy, to see the sacred relic of Kerith-Sol thrown at a man's feet like a handout." "Yes," Jonathan confirmed. Amara was silent for a long time, studying the blade with eyes full of that calm, calculating fury that burns colder than any flame. "Then we'll give her exactly what she wanted," she said finally. "We'll let the entire galaxy witness this moment. But not the way she intended." *****. What happened over the next 12 months went down in diplomatic history as the Shadow Turning, an event studied in every Academy of Interstellar Relations for decades to come. Humanity didn't hide the relic. It didn't lock it away in a vault. It didn't display it like a conqueror's trophy. Instead, they did something that no one in the galaxy expected. The Earth Council assembled the finest historians, linguists, and ancient culture experts of House Kerith-Sol, not only humans, but also scholars from friendly species willing to collaborate with humanity. Their goal was one, to understand the true significance of this relic, to discover the names of the founders whose memories were locked within the crystals of the hilt, and to learn the history of each of them. It took 8 months of painstaking work. 8 months, during which a team of researchers pieced together the lost legends, for it turned out that House Kerith-Sol itself had forgotten the true history of its relic. It had become a symbol, an empty form of veneration, devoid of content, passed down from generation to generation simply because that's how it's always been. People learned what the Kerith-Sol themselves did not, that the blade was forged not as a weapon of power, but as a monument to peace. 11,000 years ago, during the Great Schism, when the Proto-Kerith clans waged a bloody war of extermination, a group of 7 warriors from both sides of the conflict refused to continue the slaughter. They forged this blade from weapons scavenged from the battlefields of both sides, fusing their enemies' swords into a single metal symbolizing the end of hatred. The 7 crystals in the hilt were not symbols of the house's founder's power, they were the memory of 7 warriors who chose peace over vengeance, and whose names were erased by history, rewritten by subsequent generations of House Kerith-Sol, who preferred to remember this relic as a symbol of their supremacy rather than a monument to reconciliation. Jonathan Murphy, upon learning this story, sat silently in his office for a long time, holding a printout of the research report in his hands. "She had no idea what she was throwing at us," he whispered. Asterisk asterisk asterisk. A year after that humiliating day in the hall of House Kerith-Sol, Jonathan Murphy returned again, this time not as a supplicant, but as a messenger of an event that would forever change the way the galaxy viewed humanity. The hall was filled just as it had been the previous time, the noble families of House Kerith-Sol, their allies, and representatives of neighboring houses, invited to yet another display of influence and power. Lady Thurenval sat on her throne, a slight, condescending curiosity etched on her face. She expected to see the petitioner return, hoping to beg for another concession. She was not prepared for what she saw. Jonathan Murphy entered the hall accompanied by a delegation that silenced the entire court, not only the humans, but also representatives of the 3 other major houses of the galaxy, invited by humanity to Lady Thurenval gifted this relic to humanity, calling it a beggar's gift. She said that even the greatest treasures of her house meant no more to her than dust. He raised the blade so that the light from the chandeliers reflected off its polished surface, and the 7 crystals flashed in 7 different shades. "She was wrong about only one thing," he continued. "That relic was never truly a treasure of her house. It was a memory her own people had forgotten." At a signal, the technical team activated the resonance mechanism, and the next moment the entire hall was filled with sound, not a hologram, not a recording, but the true resonance of ancient memories locked in crystals millennia ago. 7 voices, 7 warriors, speaking a language no one in the hall understood, but the emotions embedded in these words, remorse, hope, a vow to end the war for the sake of future generations, were so pure and so powerful that they translated themselves through universal emotional patterns, understandable to any sentient being, regardless of species. The hall froze. Lady Thurenval sat on her throne, paler than ever, listening to voices her people had not heard for 11,000 years, the voices of the founders of the world, not the founders of power, and a shadow passed across her face that could not be hidden even in her own court. Jonathan Murphy waited for the resonance to die down and then continued, now addressing not only Lady Vol, but the entire galaxy watching the broadcast. Humanity has restored what House Kerith-Sol lost over millennia of arrogance, the true history of its own relic. We could have kept this find for ourselves, used it as a weapon of humiliation, as Lady Vol once used it against us. But we didn't. He walked up to the pedestal where the relic had once stood and, with care and a respect that Lady Vol herself had failed to show a year ago, returned the blade to its rightful place. "We return your relic to you, Lady Vol," he said, looking her straight in the eye. "But now it stands before you not as a symbol of your superiority, but as what it truly was, a monument to 7 warriors who chose peace over vengeance. Humanity does not need your treasure to prove its worth. It was enough for us to return to you what you lost, your own forgotten history." A murmur swept through the hall, but not laughter, as it had a year ago. This time, it was a whisper of awe, the whisper of those who had just witnessed a moment that would forever change the balance of respect between 2 civilizations. Lady Thurenval rose slowly from her throne. For the first time in her life, she found no words to respond. She looked at the blade, returned to its pedestal, glowing with the 7 flames of a memory her own people had forgotten, and she understood that the man standing before her, the very man she had publicly humiliated in front of her entire nobility a year ago, had just accomplished what no member of her own house had been able to do in millennia, he had returned to her people the soul of their own history. "Why?" she whispered finally, and not a trace of the previous contempt remained in her voice, only genuine, confused curiosity. "Why did you return what you could have taken for yourself? We gave you reason to consider us unworthy of this relic." Jonathan Murphy looked at her for a long second, and there was no triumph or vengeance in his eyes, only the calm, firm confidence of a man who knew the value of true strength. "Because humanity does not measure its greatness by what we can take from others, Lady Vol," he replied. "We measure it by what we can give back to those who have lost it. You wanted to show the galaxy our insignificance. Instead, you gave us the opportunity to show who we truly are." Asterisk asterisk asterisk. News of this moment spread across the known galaxy faster than any military event in the last century. Billions of sentient beings, representing dozens of species, watched the live broadcast as humanity, a species previously considered by many to be an insignificant newcomer among the stars, demonstrated something no one expected, not the power of arms, but strength of character. House Kerith-Sol, once renowned for its arrogance and disdain for younger civilizations, began to change after that day. Lady Thurin Vol, deeply shaken by what transpired in her own chamber, initiated the house's first ever cultural exchange program with humanity, not out of guilt, but out of genuine, first ever respect for a species she had once considered unworthy of even touching their sacred relics. The trade agreement that Jonathan Murphy had originally arrived to negotiate on that fateful day a year ago was extended not on terms dictated by House Kerith-Sol, but on terms of true partnership, a first in the history of relations between the two civilizations. And the blade known as the Founder's Shadow now stood in the hall of House Kerith-Sol, not beneath a glass dome of indifference, but in a sanctuary of honor built especially for it, with a new plaque, added by Lady Vol's personal order, proclaiming in the universal language for all guests of the house, "A gift from humanity. A monument to a world we forgot, and which they helped us remember." Jonathan Murphy, returning to Earth after that historic day, did not seek recognition or celebrate victory as a triumph over a vanquished enemy. He sat that evening on the balcony of his Geneva apartment, watching the sunset, and thought not of Lady Vol, not of the hall full of noble families, but of the 7 nameless warriors who had lived 11,000 years ago, whose voices were finally heard after millennia of silence. He raised his glass in their honor, in silence, without witnesses, without broadcast. "Thank you for teaching us," he whispered, "that true strength doesn't come from tearing others down for their weakness, but from giving back to people what makes them strong." The sky over Geneva was darkening, the stars were emerging one by one through the twilight, and some were there. Among them, lay the path to the Crystal House, which would never again look upon humanity as something small and insignificant. Because the day Lady Thurin Vol dropped the relic at man's feet to humiliate an entire species, she unwittingly placed into his hands the one thing humanity could do better than any other civilization in the known universe: turn pain into dignity, and contempt into a legend that would outlive any empire, any throne, or any pride that stood in the way of true greatness. And,